In tonight's discussion, we want to talk about why would we want to pass a mill levy to fund the EMS side of the fire district. And to start off with, let's go with a little bit of background information. In 2008, the fire department and the ambulance service merged, and they were both volunteer systems. But the workload became enough at that point in time that it was decided to hire the first fire chief, and shortly thereafter, an EMS coordinator who was also a paramedic. So right off the bat, there were two paid staff that came along with that merger. Well, as time went on, obviously it became more apparent that the call volume was going up significantly. And so some grants were asked, or some grants were applied for that allowed us in about 2012 to add on some additional folks. So we added on 4 additional people and to help carry that burden. A quick chart that I'll show outlines this growth increase. And as you can see there, from 2008 to 2016, that our total call volume went up from roughly about 250 calls a year to over 700 calls a year. And when you look at the red line in there, which is the EMS calls, the medical calls, those calls went up substantially between 2013 and 2016. And so you can see what that growth looked like in just a very short period of time. So, as I mentioned, a grant was applied for, actually, that brought these folks on, and it was a 2-year grant. Well, that 2-year grant came and went, and luckily we applied for a second grant and received it as well. But the reason we're discussing this here today is that we need, as a community, to make a decision. And that decision needs to entail the level of care and the level of service that we want to be able to provide, or that you wanted provided to you. So under that grant, we were able to bring on 3 paramedics. And so our total staff was 3 paramedics and 3 advanced EMTs. So that gave us the ability to provide ALS level service for our community. The only community in the county, nonetheless, that had that level of service. And by having paid staff and volunteers, we were able to do a pretty significant coverage level to where we could guarantee an ALS provider almost 24/7, 365. As I mentioned, the reality is those grants are coming to an end. And what many people don't realize is how the systems are funded. Now, the fire department itself has been and has always been funded through taxpayers' support through your property taxes. However, ironically, the EMS service, from its very beginnings as a volunteer system, was actually a private volunteer service. And so therefore, they made their money simply by only the revenue generated from the calls they ran and whatever donations and fundraisers they could muster up. Well, in today's day and age, that really doesn't cover it. Even though our call volume has increased, and which means increased in revenue, the cost of apparatus, the cost of equipment has went up significantly. Today, a brand new ambulance starts at about $160,000 a year. The equipment that goes on it, the defibrillators that we use, the cots that we use, a defibrillator alone is about $32,000. A cot's anywhere from $10,000 to $16,000. And then that's just the hard equipment. Then you have all the medical supplies that go along with that. So it's pretty easy to say that you can spend upwards of $200,000+ equipping one ambulance, and that's before you get the people on board. So really it is a pretty expensive venture to be able to maintain and to equip the way that we need to equip it in such a way that's really most beneficial and useful to the community. So as we said, we've established the fact that there really hasn't been any support mechanism there for the EMS service from the beginning. And now that the call volume has significantly went up, and if we backtrack just a little bit to say when the calls were only 100 and 150 calls a year, that level of funding was okay, and to be able to respond to all those calls on a solely volunteer basis was manageable. But as you've seen by that chart, with that call volume spiking, it really becomes critical that we have the staffing ability to take care of this. The other thing that we ran into is we do a lot of facility transports of folks from our local hospital to to the Billings area where they can get greater level of care or a better level of care, and many times it's our staffing that helps facilitate that. With if the staffing wasn't in place, we'd have to have an ambulance come out of Billings, and sometimes that can take an hour to 2 hours. Well, that's just travel time, and if the ambulances are even available. So in some cases, a patient that needs to get to Billings may have to wait 3 and 4 hours before that ambulance can come available and get out here to them. So we've established why we need it. The grants will run out, so we'll lose 4 positions if those grants go away and we don't have the ability to fund them. The other thing that we'll lose is the ability to improve on our equipment and maintain the good quality of the equipment that we have, because somewhere sacrifice has to be made. We can't manage the current budget that we have without another level of income if these grants go away. So by managing that, I mean we can't manage personnel costs and equipment costs simultaneously. Currently in our budget showed that we were about $140,000 shortfall from being able to do that without some additional level of funding. So what happens if we do nothing? Well, if the grants run out, more than likely we'll have to lay off the 4 positions that the grants hired. We'll go back to predominantly a volunteer status, which that in itself is not a bad thing, but we won't have the level of care. We'll be down to 1 paramedic, and that person can't cover 24/7, 365. So our security of having somebody available all the time will diminish, and our response times will diminish, just simply because it takes a volunteer longer to come to the station and respond than it does someone that's actually working in the station. And these aren't scare tactics. We're not trying to scare anybody into saying you have to do this. But these are realities. This is what the funding level will look like when these grants go away without some additional support from the district. So how do we solve that? Well, while nobody likes the idea of raising taxes, and that always creates a cringe on everybody's face, the reality is that's the only way to really bolster up the system to support what we currently provide. So what does that look like? It's really this simple. It looks like passing a mill levy across the response area within the geographic boundaries of the response area. That really will cost the taxpayers, if you have a home that's valued, a taxable valuation of $100,000, this mill levy will cost you $17.96. Likewise, if your home is valued at $200,000 taxable valuation at $200,000, it's $35 and change. So the reality is that this is not very expensive. That for really what some of us spend in lattes and foo-foo coffee in a week, we can support maintaining the level of care and the level of consistency and response that we currently have. So we kind of touched really on what the benefits are if we pass it. In addition to having that ability to have that guaranteed level of response, we also have the ability to better train our volunteers. We have the availability of making an ambulance more readily available for those folks that need transferred to from Columbus to the Billings hospitals in a timely manner. We have the ability to help out our ER staff at our local hospital. And we have the ability to do a lot of more public education in CPR and first aid and injury prevention and just overall outreach to our community. So it's not like we're just buying blue sky. In fact, we're buying a service, very critical level of service. The other thing I'd remind you of is, as a paramedic level service, we're the only one in the county. So you don't reach another paramedic level ambulance for at least 50 miles in either direction of this community. So not only is the passage of this significantly important to our community, but it also helps those other communities outside of our response area, and that we do a lot of mutual aid with them. So again, you have to ask yourself as a community a couple questions. Is the cost worth what you're going to get? And we hope to say that we've done a good job, and you could look at that and say yes. But the realism is, for $17.96 annually, or double that if your home's twice that $100,000 value, is to look at that and say, is it worth what we have the potential to lose? As a community, what level of service do we want provided? If it's my loved one that I have to call 911 for, what do I want? Do I want a speedy response by capable people in a timely manner, or am I willing to roll the dice? And again, that is not a knock to our volunteer system, who works very hard, is very proud of the services they provide. But the reality is, it's not quite what we'll have with paid staffing, and they recognize that. And so we ask you as a community to look at it and again, ask yourself those questions. What's my life worth? What's the value of my family's life worth? What's the value of a quick response by highly competent, trained professionals to be able to come and help you out in your time of need? So we thank you for listening, and in the end, we hope that you vote with your conscience and the things that you feel are right.